Welcome to Simmons Says, where I help emerging and struggling writers create intriguing plots and compelling characters to make their stories hard to put down and even harder to forget. Hey there, welcome to another episode of Simmons Says, where I try to help you figure out what happens next in your stories. I had an interesting experience the other day. Yesterday, something interesting happened in one of my classes, my writing classes. I gave my students a mystery writing exercise. Now, I divided them into three groups and told them to build a mystery story using my favorite approach, which is start by writing the crime. Okay? Now, each group could choose whatever crime they wanted. One chose murder, another one chose a cybercrime, and the third chose an art theft, right? Forgery and art theft, right? Now, their assignment was simple: work out exactly how the crime was committed, and once they understood that, they could identify, the other elements of the story: a victim, the villain, the sleuth, and any other elements. And they said, "Oh, yeah, okay, I guess we can do it that way." And I said, "No, just trust me, just try it this way." This was the purpose of the exercise. What fascinated me wasn't the crimes they chose, it was how they approached developing them. One group immediately became excited about creating the characters. They kept drifting off in that direction. Another group worked out part of the crime and then jumped straight to the motive, right? They just got caught up in that, the why. Then the cybercrime group became fascinated by the underlying premise on which they based the crime itself. They dug up, through research, a sort of a conspiracy, internet conspiracy theme, and built out of that. Now, again, that approach was interesting, but they sort of went into the weeds with that research. Different approaches wound up in the same destination. Every group eventually ran into this problem: they hadn't thought through the crime sufficiently. In other words, with the murder, they thought, okay, here's how the murder is created or perpetrated, and then the person gets away. That's pretty much the details that they thought of. So I stopped them. I asked, with one of them, with the art theft group, I asked, okay, how was the painting stolen? What was the methodology for that? And they went just a certain distance on that operation, but left a lot of holes in there in terms of the actual point at which the painting was switched out and the original stolen, how that was actually perpetrated, where it was going to be hidden, the original painting, so forth and so on. As we walked through the mechanics of the crime, something interesting happened. New possibilities appeared. Better motivation surfaced, more believable characters and actions emerged, and the story became more exciting. Every one of those groups eventually ran into the same problem. They hadn't thought through the crime completely. The art theft group never really figured out how the painting swap happened, the actual details. One student even decided that the story was becoming boring and started inventing exciting scenes and bits and things to sort of make it more energized. And I stopped him. I asked him to explain exactly how the switch was done, how it was pulled off. And as we walked through the mechanics of the crime, something interesting happened. New possibilities appeared, better motivation surfaced, more believable character actions emerged. The story became more exciting, not because we added stuff, but because we added understanding. Actual details and understanding generated the energy that was missing before. The murder group had a similar problem. They knew why the killer committed the murder, and they figured out how the killer escaped the immediate scene. But then I asked, well, how does the killer escape the investigation? How do they throw the police off the track? Silence. They'd forgotten that escaping the crime scene isn't the same thing as escaping the detectives. Because again, proximity, relationships, these things are factors that the investigation will move through and check out and begin to build their suspect list. So as we worked through these details, the story naturally became stronger. The cybercrime group had the opposite challenge. They needed to research the myth and the technology behind the crime itself. But once they understood those foundations, they could begin thinking like their unusual perpetrator and imagine how the crime would escalate and become increasingly more dangerous, raising the stakes. Three different mysteries, three different groups, one common lesson. Details matter. More specifically, understanding the crime gives you almost everything: motivation, clues, suspects, red herring, character behavior, the investigation methodology, even in some cases, the solution. That's why I keep telling writers to write the crime first. I mean, yes, you can begin with fascinating characters or a location or something like that. Absolutely. But if you're writing a true mystery story, sooner or later you have to have an understanding exactly how the crime happened. Otherwise, you'll have plot holes big enough to drive a truck through, and the readers will find out and you'll lose them in the long run. Now, yesterday's class wasn't just an exercise, it became a demonstration. I didn't have to convince my students that this method works. They discovered it for themselves. And that's really the point. One of the students even went, I didn't see that. I didn't see how that would work until. So, sometimes the best writing lesson isn't giving someone the answers, it's giving them the right problems to solve and pushing for them to unravel the puzzle by looking at the details. Okay? I'm Alex Simmons. That's it for today on another Simmons Says. So be with us next time when I will once again attempt to help you figure out what happens next in your story, especially if it's a mystery story. Take care.